Have you ever thought about freezing tomatoes whole from your garden? Maybe canning isn't your thing, but you want a way to preserve some tomatoes for the winter. I'm going to answer a whole lot of questions today about a very sensitive topic, and it's about freezing tomatoes. Who knew? I often get a lot of tomatoes that ripen all at the same time. I don't have time for canning. I'm not interested in canning. So a few years ago, I started freezing tomatoes. Now, freezing tomatoes is either something you're gonna love because it's fast and easy, or it's gonna send shivers up your spine. I have had a ton of questions about freezing tomatoes, so I'm gonna cover the most common ones that I had, but if I don't answer your question in this video, please comment below and I'll do my very best to answer the question in the comment. So let's dive in. Can you freeze tomatoes whole? And absolutely you can. That's how I do it all the time. You can core the center of the tomato only if you wish, but you don't have to. You just wash the tomatoes, throw them in the freezer bag, and that's it. There's no need to slice or dice them. You just put them in whole. It doesn't get easier than that. Do you need to blanch tomatoes before you freeze them? The answer is no, you don't. You just wash them and put them in your freezer bag. Do you need to remove the skins from the tomatoes before you freeze them? And no, you absolutely don't. What happens is once you freeze them, when you take them out of the freezer bag, you can either put them in a dish of water or you can run the tomato itself just under some tap water, and then the skin will actually just peel off really easily from the tomato. Can you freeze cherry tomatoes or just regular larger sized tomatoes? And yes, you sure can. I've done both. I've had success with both. The only thing I find with the little tomatoes is I would just put them in something. I wouldn't be worrying about peeling the skin off of them. When you think of just the little cherry tomatoes, they're so small, I wouldn't be fiddling to pick skins out. I would use it for something like, for instance, a soup where you're going to puree it and you're not going to notice the skins. Now, this was an important question for someone, and can you use frozen tomatoes for bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches? Unfortunately, no, you can't. The texture of the tomato does change. It becomes similar to, say, a stewed tomato, so it's not good for BLTs. A very common question that I got was, does the texture change after you freeze the tomatoes? And yes, it does. It's not like a plump, fresh tomato that you would pick from your garden. It's similar to canned stewed tomatoes. So just think of how it's a little bit more squishy and it's softer for sure. But what I would use that for is I would replace, instead of buying canned tomatoes from the store, I would use my frozen tomatoes and I would make things like soup, stew, chili. You could even make salsa with it. Oh, and one more thing that I always make with stewed tomatoes is anything related to pasta. So pasta sauce, whether it's marinara, anything to do with pasta because I love pasta. Another question was, do tomatoes get freezer burnt? And so what I do is I do store them in a Ziploc bag. And if I even need just a couple of tomatoes, I just pull them out of the Ziploc bag and reseal it. I store my tomatoes in a chest freezer in the basement, so I've not had a problem with them being freezer burnt. I still have one bag of tomatoes left from last summer that I didn't use over the winter, but I used some last week in chili. They were just fine. The tomatoes have been in my freezer for just about a year now, and they're not freezer burnt at all. I wouldn't recommend storing the tomatoes loose because I do think that they would become freezer burnt. Another question was, does the flavor change in the tomato? It is a little bit different because you're comparing fresh tomatoes and frozen tomatoes. It's still delicious, but it is a little bit different. Something that I thought was a really great idea was, the question was, can you freeze tomatoes and then can them later? And one of my comments was actually, that's what the person does. And they freeze all their tomatoes in the summertime when they're really busy in their gardens, and then they do their canning in the wintertime when they have more time. Something people were really concerned about is, what if the power goes out or you lose power for an extended period of time? What I would suggest is that if you are going to be freezing food, because I'm assuming you're going to have meat, you could have frozen fruit and even vegetables, get a little generator so that it does run just your freezer even, and then you're not worried about losing all of that hard work. If you want to see exactly how I freeze tomatoes, make sure you check out the video on your screen right now. If freezing tomatoes doesn't seem to be your thing, then YouTube thinks you might like this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.